So we have another Season 5 episode, which is fairly endemic of Season 5, aka, it's an episode! And from an analysis perspective, I'm sitting here like there's huge chunks of this episode going by, and I'm just not writing anything down. It's like, okay. Yep. Yep, that's cool. This whole, I mentioned this before, the idea of some of this character development for the Rangers, in this case, would have been better served before now, I think. I mean, we've learned a lot about Minbari culture already. We've learned quite a bit about who and what and how. Why is it that this is just kind of coming out of nowhere? Like, hey, here's the thing, and it's cool. That's not my complaint. It's just weirdly positioned. Let me just go down my notes in order. I'm going to try and have something to talk about here. Let me go ahead and say that the banter between the two Minbari, the elder Minbari, was very well written. A little stiff in the execution. Guest stars weren't exactly bad guest stars, but it didn't have a lot of the warmth that you would expect that kind of banter to have. In fact, at first I thought this was the beginnings of some kind of renewed conflict between the casts, until I realized they were joking. And that pretty much comes down to the delivery. Because, again, once I actually rewatched the scene and just closed my eyes and just listened to the words that were being said, it's like, okay, yeah, I see it now. I also want to say that I like the term, anyone can meditate in silence, because that is absolutely true. Well, I mean, obviously it's not 100% true, but the point being, anybody can do something when it's easy. Doing something when it's difficult is much more difficult, right? And that's the other thing I have to say about that, because it's such an obvious statement, it almost doesn't even need to be stated. But as is, though, it is something that, I don't know, I've always found to be an interesting concept. Off topic for a second. I've actually tried meditation in my own life quite a few years ago, actually. And I ended up not really doing it, because it just wasn't doing anything for me as far as what I wanted out of it. However, it did kind of segue into discipline training. It was something I did to try and focus my mind and try to help keep myself in more control of myself, which is something that I like, being in control of myself. It's one of the reasons I've never really gotten into drugs or alcohol or anything like that, is because I don't like being out of control. Make sense? So, I remember this distinctly. I was sitting at a sushi restaurant waiting for an order to come in. And I'm just sitting there, and I chose a single spot on the wall, and I just stared at it. And tried not to move while it happened. While I was waiting for my order to come up. Now, that was extremely difficult. Not just because doing that in general is difficult, but because it was the middle of a busy restaurant with tons of people running around and talking and laughing and all that stuff. And so it was much more difficult to retain that level of discipline, while everyone else around me is going, blah, blah, blah. You with me? So I have to admit, I do like the concept of, especially for the Rangers and what they are trying to become and what they have been trying to do for the last quadrillion years, trying to say, no, we don't want you to meditate. We want you to really have that kind of self-control, that kind of discipline, to be able to meditate even while someone is talking, for example. Just a nice little touch. I don't actually have a lot else to talk about when it comes to the Minbari. I do want to talk about Delenn, and how I like how the idea she presents with regards to the... Oh god, I can't remember the species name all of a sudden. The carrion feeders. They've actually been mentioned before, and they've been shown several times. She mentions how what we should do with them is use them as spies and information network messengers is the big thing, right? And it's a great idea, because, first of all, this isn't like they're forcing them to do it. Remember, these are volunteers. These are people who are like, hey, please, I want to join the Rangers. Well, okay, we will use what we have to this extent. And she has this great line about how we have always, trained trained Rangers for Minbari purposes, but instead now we're going to try and adapt our purposes to fit the resources at hand, which is a nice and logical perspective. And what she says makes perfect sense. What I find absolutely amusing is that, as usual, Delenn does not consider politics into her equations. This is actually doubly funny, because she does this twice in this episode. Once now, and I'll discuss that in a moment, and once later when it comes to the, oh god, I actually can't remember what they called it. The terror thing. Sorry, bug. The terror thing that I was just talking about. Well, not just talking about, that I'm about to talk about. Damn it, that bug really distracted me. I apologize. Focusing back. See, obviously my discipline lessons didn't carry forward into the future. God, that would have been like 20 years ago now. Anyways, point being, Delenn has a common tactic, for lack of a better term, of just ignoring the politics of the situation and saying, no, this is what's right. And that's been her character forever. That's nothing new. But I find it interesting because you can see the seeds being sown here of what is effectively a secret police. I mean, they're talking about the Rangers, and they already have carte blanche to operate on such a level that it's a little bit crazy, and I'm a little bit amazed that most of the political organizations were able to accept that. What she is now adding to that is an additional duty: messengers. Now, that sounds like such a minor thing, but I want you to really think for a moment how immensely important communication is to everything. It's like, I'm just going to lay that flat there. Everything! And yeah, the idea of them effectively taking over this kind of duty. Now, granted, this is speaking with a military perspective, with an intelligence perspective, within the purview of the Rangers, but it is still expanding that purview, because now they're doing other duties within the scope of what it is that is theirs. And that's a dangerous, slippery slope situation there. That is so easy for that to slide right over that and be like, nope, we're just going to start taking over communications. I just find it interesting because I have no doubt whatsoever that Delenn isn't even thinking about that. Which brings me to the second point, which I am now going to talk about now that there's no bugs distracting me. It was just a little fruit fly, by the way, just for reference. I hate fruit flies. They just go, bzz, bzz, and then you smash them and they die. Kind of like Trace, actually. But I don't want to segue that right now. What I want to segue to is the terror concept. I don't remember their word for it, but I remember it as terror. It is very appropriately Minbari to view this as inverse revenge. We're not interested in going and beating the crap out of this guy. That's not really the point. This isn't... she flat out denies the idea that this is some kind of vigilante situation. Instead, this is... No. This victim, because he is, let's make that 100% clear, he is a victim, now wishes to go and reclaim his terror, to own back up to the situation so that he no longer need be afraid, so that he no longer need be a victim, for lack of a better term. And so they arrange this whole situation. They support him, and I love the support structure here. They have pretty much most of the station and the security personnel and their own trained rangers, along with the Minbari elders present, all to ensure that one man can stand one-on-one with his victimizer, with the person who abused him, and go ahead and face him and do whatever will come of that. I like it because it's helping without forcing, if that makes any sense. It would be too easy to coddle the victim. It would be too easy to go kill the victim's, oppressors for them. It would be too easy to lock them away forever. But it is difficult and wonderful to help them to use the superior manpower, firepower, resources, access, political connections, whatever you want to call it, the superior resources of the group to aid the individual rather than supplant the individual, helping without forcing. I love that concept. And I love the fact that when he finally does it and he finally confronts Tracer, he's fine. Despite the fact that he's this wounded animal, basically, all scarred up and teared up, he still manages it just fine. Which brings me to Tracer, and I know that seems like a weird segue, but honestly, there's so little to talk about here. First of all, they do actually name-drop Nagrath in this episode. Woo! And they imply that Nagrath was killed. They never actually state outright, if I'm not mistaken, at any point in the show. Maybe that's discussed in one of the comics or ancillary works that I'm not aware of. But they never actually say what happened to Nigroth. It's just there is now a big vacuum in the criminal underworld of Babylon 5. Now, the fact that there is a criminal underworld of Babylon 5 makes perfect sense. I've talked about this before, so I don't really feel the need to recover that. What I want to know is, why is Trace... Did I keep calling him Tracer? I swear I haven't been playing Overwatch lately. Trace is pathetic. Now, they call this out in the episode. They flat out call him a bully. And it's funny because I have said for years, since I was in 5th grade is the first time I remember making this statement. I have said for years that bullies are just cowards, really. Like, that's what truly defines a bully, is that they are weak, they are cowardly, and they try to make up for those facts by their behavior. Not saying that's that's excusable or whatever. It's just that has been my experience, and that has remained true for the last umpteen bagrillion years, however long it's been at this point. That has still been true in my experience. So they flat out show that Trace is just a bully, and he does act like a bully. In acting with his men, in acting with the woman who helped him, and in his actions with the people who owed him money, and in his actions towards the end. He is just consistently portrayed as a bully. But it's really flat, and it's really kind of boring, because Trace basically has no character of his own other than bully. And I also wonder why this guy is in charge of the criminal underground. Let me explain what I mean by this a little bit. Usually when you see a criminal character, and I do specifically mean criminal, who has taken over by brutality or force or strength of charisma or whatever, they are someone who is willing to go farther than everyone else. I'm going to give you 2 examples that are my personal favorite examples of this concept. Heath Ledger's the Joker in The Dark Knight, and the player character, Mr. Vercetti, in Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Those 2 characters were not particular... I mean, well, okay, there's arguments that the Joker was actually quite smart, but the point is, they weren't super great. Like, they weren't super mega, superhuman, capable of fighting off billions of people. They had no personal power, like, at all. And it's not like they walked into this with some kind of massive political backing or some kind of huge political power of any form, really, backing them throughout the course of this. But what both of them share is a willingness to go farther than other people. And generally, people will kowtow to that kind of personality because you're willing to go farther than they are. You're willing to do whatever is necessary to succeed. Generally with an almost callous disregard for their own safety, despite the fact that both the Joker and Mr. Vercetti, I hope I'm saying that right, it's been a while since I played Vice City, actually did care about themselves to some extent or another, but they were willing to put themselves on the line in order to get it done. Now, I actually like that type of character, as I mentioned, when presented properly. I feel like Trace was supposed to be that type of character, but he wasn't. He was a bully. And a bully is a coward who is pathetic. I mean, we've already discussed this. So why is Trace taking over the criminal underground? Actually, now, I can already hear the counter-argument, so let me address this. The most common counter-argument, because I've actually discussed this before, I hear is that, well, he brought a bunch of his men with him. Okay, why are they with him to begin with? If this is his modus operandi, which I'm probably pronouncing horribly wrong, how is it that he has men to bring with him? A sufficient number of men to take over. How is that feasible? His methods are not particularly brutal. We see this several times. I mean, he's willing to kill a guy to send him to scare people. That's not brutal. That's mundane, to be blunt. He's willing to kill a woman who was refusing to help him. He was willing to maim a Minbari in a brutal beating. Now, in the interest of fairness, they mentioned that the Minbari probably should have died, and if was human, would have died, so they probably just don't have any particular experience with bullying Minbari. But, again, that's it? That's all you're willing to do, is to kill people in order to get your message across. And that's all you want. That's not going farther than everyone else. That's bog standard for a criminal overlord. I'm sorry, but it is. So, I look at this guy and I think, what has made you interesting? And the main reason I'm bringing this up, and I'm probably going to get some flack for this, is I think this is a flaw of the episode. I think that Trace's purpose in the episode is for the Minbari arc, for the story arc of the anti-bullying, the reclaiming your terror, all that stuff, because he fits that like a glove. But then all of a sudden, he's this criminal overlord guy who all used to run this other operation, and now is trying to run this operation in the power vacuum. I don't think that last part makes sense, and I don't think that last part was really even necessary. He could have just been a thug. Like, just some random thug. There really was no additional need for him to be the new guy who was trying to take over. Just my opinion. Final thoughts. So, Garibaldi, quick aside, I don't like writing out Garibaldi each time, because, writing, I've already got shorthand going on with my notes. So every time I write down Garibaldi, I just put a big old stylized G. And so sometimes when there's a lot of Garibaldi stuff, it's G, 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 just all over the place in my notes. Anyways, Garibaldi calls out Miss Lockley, Elizabeth Lockley, in the full view of the mess hall, and she gives a speech back to him. First question, did Garibaldi do that as a calculated move to call her out in front of everyone? Or is this Garibaldi just being Garibaldi and tired of the runaround? No answers here. I'm just curious of your thoughts. Second question. When she gets back at him, when she responds to him, is she that simple-minded? Or is she that zealous? I'm curious which you think it is. Or indeed, if there's another possible interpretation. This is the only two I've come up with. Because, in my opinion, either she is legitimately simple. I don't have a better way to... I don't want to say stupid, because it's not stupid, but simplistic in her outlook, that she legitimately believes that, military does not set policy and blah, blah, all this stuff that she talks about. Or is there a more righteous anger behind her? What I'm trying to say here is that obviously she gets upset either way, and there's actually a really brilliant scene afterwards, which I'll talk about in just a second. But either way, she gets upset. But is she being upset because, this is... It's a fine shading between the two. That's why I'm having such a hard time discussing this. In my opinion, she either, again, is simple. I know it's like the third time I've said that. Or she ideologically believes that even though things are not that simple in real life, things must be made that simple, forced to be that simple, when you accept the oath, when you accept the uniform and all the things that she did. And therefore she is righteously indignant, almost to the point of zealousy, which is why I mentioned that, or zealotry, excuse me. When she talks about, this is not what you're supposed to do. You took on that uniform, you took on that responsibility. You don't do that. What do you guys think? I'm actually kind of curious. It's also interesting because, and I'll talk about this in just a moment, I swear, I feel a lot of the Lockley stuff was very rushed and doesn't really have the same kind of polish to the arc that the rest of, characters do. And that makes perfect sense because it was. Remember, up until, the deadline, everyone thought that this was going to be Ivanova. So a lot of this had to be pretty much shoved in on the fly. Now, Lord knows JMS always has his trapdoors concept and is very good at improv. But it really feels, you could feel the difference of the storyline that was polished and refined and has huge arc significance to the storyline he had to come up with yesterday. Final thoughts. Why make Lockley the ex-lover of Sheridan? Now I know I have a bit of a reputation for being anti-romance on my show, and that's fine. I accept that because I am. In fiction, I should clarify. But it is worth noting that I tend to be I'm not actually... See, that's actually not true. I am not anti-romance in fiction. I am not doing it for a purpose. I don't know how to put that. If you're going to make a romantic entanglement in a show, or a game, or a book, or a movie, or whatever, do something with it. That's all I really ask. I don't like flash-in-the-pan romances. I don't like romances so that there's romance, for no other reason. And I don't like romance of the week. Those are the three most common concepts. And in this case, I feel like the previous connection between Lockley and Sheridan is unnecessary. The type of connection that Sheridan had to Ivanova was perfectly acceptable for this type of thing. And you could tell that that's where a lot of these scenes were intended to be. if I can be so bold, and I've actually commented on this before, Ivanova and Sheridan had better, the actors had better chemistry on screen than Sheridan and Delenn tended to. Now, that brings me to that scene I mentioned earlier. Lockley goes off and enters a turbo lift with Sheridan, and there's a lot of really great natural chemistry between the two. And the two act off each other really well. And this is not the first time they've done that, too. So the two gel very well together, and it was a treat to see them, even if it was only for, like, the one scene. But you don't need there to be a romance entanglement for that to happen. You could just have them be previous officers who served, or really good friends, or maybe they're related in some way. I mean, there's a lot of other ways you could do that. You know, you could just have them be two people who gel. To be blunt, they did that over in Voyager. Forgive me for bringing this up yet again, but Tom Paris and Harry Kim, the first few seconds they interacted with each other, had a lot of great natural chemistry. And they were complete strangers at that point in time. And yet it's still just, bam! You could have done the same thing with Lockley. Have Lockley just fit with Sheridan. There's no need for that backstory, in my opinion. And that brings me to my other point. I also feel like this is out of character for Sheridan. First of all, he has never mentioned anyone else other than her. I know this is skipping forward just a little bit, but the next episode, we're going to get a little bit more of the relationship thing. I guess I'll save more of my thoughts about it till then. So all I'm going to talk about now is how extremely out of character it is for Sheridan to not tell Delenn this. This is a man who walked up and said, hey, I'm dying in 20 years. This is a man who said, yeah, I'm going to Zahadum. This is a man who believes in honesty to an almost naive degree. Actually, there's no almost. To a naive degree, Sheridan believes in honesty. In simplicity. I mean, I just talked about this with the whole anti-politician thing. Sheridan has a very idealistic viewpoint on the world. The idea that he would keep this from Delenn is actually, in my opinion, a huge misstep. It doesn't even add anything like in terms of, haha, married couple humor, or, oh, look, drama from the previous, from the ex coming into things. Instead, it's just there. And I feel that was a very serious misstep as well. That's all I got for this week. Obviously, I will be ranting more about Lockley. And I want to make this clear, by the way, I don't actually dislike the actress. In fact, I actually think she does a really good job as Lockley. I just feel like a lot of her character was not used well, to put that as nicely as I can. But we'll talk about that next week when we bring back the return of Bester. See you around, guys.